All right, so in this video, I'm going to be showing you how to utilize Substrate. Basically, I'm going to give you a foundation for setting up Substrate, and also creating a base material utilizing Substrate that you can use with ORM channel packing, which is ambient, occlusion, roughness, and metallic. And that's basically the standard setup that's been used for Quixel Megascan. So if you get any assets from Fab, from Quixel, or anything like that, this will allow you to set it up to work with those assets. So the first thing you need to do is enable Substrate. So if you go to Edit, Project Settings, you want to search for Substrate and then check all of these boxes. So the only box that we will not be checking is the Substrate Opaque Material Rough Refraction. It's not really necessary for the purposes of this video. Okay, so once those are enabled, it's going to ask you to restart the engine. Once you do, Substrate will be enabled. Now, what will happen with your existing materials is that it will automatically convert those to a substrate material, and I'll show you what that looks like. So this is an asset that I downloaded from Fab. Now, if you want to find this asset, the best way to do it is to just type this in the Fab search. So this is the serial alphanumeric serial that is attached to this asset. So if you type this in, it will show this asset specifically. So if you click on Fab here, and then click on the search bar, and then just type that in, you'll be able to go directly to this asset if you want to use this same one. But this should apply to just about any asset from Quixel in Fab. So if I show you the material, the existing material that is created when you download an asset from Fab, you can see that it automatically goes in and adds in this substrate shading models slab here. So basically, this is just automatically taking all of the way things used to be done and then converting it into a substrate base node here. Now, another way you can do this is if you right-click, type in the substrate. It'll give you all the substrate specific nodes that you can use. So the most default one that you can utilize, and to kind of get the shading from Unreal Engine 4, or basically the old school way of shading before Substrate was available, is to find this Substrate UE4 default shading. Right? This will give you your base color, metallic, specular, roughness, normal, emissive, and opacity. Right? And there are other slabs in there that you can utilize as well. This substrate shading models is going to also allow you to do all of that. But what I'm going to do is show you how to set it up so it can be a little bit more future-proof, because you can utilize this setup, but then there are certain things that you won't get that you will get with some of the other slabs that are available for Substrate. So I'm going to go in and show you how to set up your base material to utilize ORM, which is the default setup for any asset you get from Fab, such as this sword. So I'm going to go over here and I'm going to, under the Fab folder that's generated when you generate a Fab asset, you then have Megascans, and then you have 3D. These are going to be anything like props and things like that. You have another one depending on if they're textures or whatever they are. So under the Megascans folder, I'm going to go in and create a materials folder, just so I know that these materials I'm creating are specifically for the Megascans assets. Under that, I'm going to create 2 more folders, so I'm going to call it functions and masters. Now, you can name these whatever you want. You can put them in different folders. I'm just doing this for the sake of the example. So under this materials and masters folder, I'm going to go in and create a new material. So I'm going to right-click, material, and I'm going to call this one master ORM substrate. Once again, naming convention, the folders you put them in, all that good stuff is completely up to you. So I'm going to double click to load this up. Now, see, by default, whenever I create a new material, it's going to create a Substrate UE4 default shading node here. This is the one I mentioned earlier, which gives you the base color, metallic, specular, roughness, normal, emissive color, and opacity, and plugs it all into the front material. But for the purpose of this demo, I'm going to get rid of this. And what I'm going to do instead is create something called a substrate slab. This is going to be one of the more useful substrate nodes that you can use, and we're going to pass everything through this. So we'll line this up here, and this is going to become our front material. Now, the reason it shows front material is because you can have a front material and a back material, so you can essentially have 2 layers on top of each other, which you used to be able to do with clear coat, but this gives you some more advanced parameters using Substrate, so you can actually have that top surface refract what's going on in the bottom surface. So you can do all kinds of cool stuff with it, which we'll get into later, but for this video, I'm just going to be focusing on the basic setup. So the next slab that I want to go in and create is going to be Substrate metalness to diffuse color F0. So this is essentially going to allow you to use your metallic value with substrate, because you notice here that none of these pins are metallic. So metallic no longer exists. You're basically going to be converting that metallic into a combination here of the diffuse albedo and the F0. So F0 is going to go into F0, obviously. Diffuse albedo will go into diffuse albedo here. And then we're going to be plugging our maps into these 3 pins here for base color, metallic, specular. Those will transfer over to here. Specular we're not going to be using because that just doesn't come in with the assets from the Fab Marketplace. You can actually get the specular map if you want to, but you have to download the asset in its raw format from the Fab website rather than using the Fab importer built into Unreal Engine. So if you want to do that, you can go in and do that as well. And you can utilize the texture graph tool that I showed you in another video to basically channel pack that into the albedo if you want to. So for now, we're going to be focusing on base color and metallic. We're also going to be using roughness and normal as well as AO. Now, another thing with AO, and I mentioned this in another video, is in order to utilize it in Unreal Engine, you want to go into your project settings and look for static lighting and uncheck the box for allow static lighting. This will get rid of all static lighting, but it will open up that channel for ambient occlusion. So then it'll actually be functional. Okay, so the next thing we want to do is I'm going to create a material function basically to set up our ORM texture setup, right? So this is going to be easier than adding the texture straight in here, which we could do as well, but to keep things clean and organized and more scalable, I'm going to go in and create a function. So under this materials folder that I created under the Fab Megascans folder, there's a functions folder. I'm going to go in here, right-click, and go into Material, Advanced Material Function. And I'm just going to call this one, let's see, Textures. Textures ORM substrate. That'll work for the example. Once again, naming convention is completely up to you. So I'm going to load this up by double-clicking it. And the editor is basically the same material editor that we were just using, but it has this different default pin in here. So what I want to do is bring in our texture samplers for this. So I'm going to go into my textures folder. And under textures, I have a resources folder. Now this is basically where I keep my blank small textures that I can use to create these templates. So that way, if I ever want to migrate one of these master materials or functions to another project or whatever it is, they have a blank clean slate to work from. Plus, they're going to be much smaller file size because they're bringing less assets with them. So these are 2 blank textures. So I have a blank white texture, which is just pure white. This is 32 by 32. And then I have a blank normal texture. This is the default normal color. And then this is 32 by 32 as well. The reason I have one for each is because the texture type itself is going to be sampled that way. So if you have just a plain white texture that's not compressed as normal, it's not going to read when you replace it with a normal texture correctly. So I'm going to take these, bring them in here. This will automatically create texture samplers. And then what I want to do is I'm going to make a duplicate of this white sampler here. So we basically have 3 of these. So this is going to represent our albedo, our ORM, and then our normal, right? Now, if you do have your specular and you want to import that, then the alpha, this would become your specular as well. And then if you want to do a different layout for your channel packing, which I usually prefer MRAH, which is metallic, roughness, ambient occlusion, and height, where height is the alpha. But I covered that in a previous video. So for this one, we're going to be focusing on the ORM setup that is used by the Quixel assets. And then you have your normal down here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select all 3 of these. I'm going to right-click and convert these to parameters. I'm also going to select all these and put them into a group. So A, textures. Now the reason I'm putting the A and then a pipe first is that prefix is basically going to be the sort order for the groups, because you can add a sort priority for the actual nodes, but you can't do it for the actual groups unless you give it naming that way. So it's going to sort alphanumerically, so A will come first. So A textures. Now I want to add a sort priority for these nodes. So when these show up in the material instance, they'll be in the order that I give them, right? So if I go in here and I go into our asset, you can see that it shows up as albedo, normal, and ORM, right? It's in that order. So I'm basically going to match that order top to bottom, because when you go in and add your textures, it should be in that order just to make things simpler for art direction and handing off the project and things like that. So what I'm going to do is take these and swap them around so it'll be in this order here. And I'm going to add the order that way. So you can see the sort priority here. I'm going to collapse everything else so it's a little bit easier to see. So sort priority, I'm going to set 0, 1 for normal, and then 2 for ORM. So they'll sort in that order in the instance, right? And then obviously I want to name these accordingly. So I'm going to do texture as a prefix, and then I do a space and then a pipe and another space. I can just copy that, including the space. I'm going to call this one albedo. This will be normal. And this will be ORM, right? So we have texture, space, pipe, space, albedo, normal, ORM. Once again, naming conventions completely up to you. This is just the method I prefer to use. Okay, so now what we need to do is output these channels to their corresponding output node. So we have an output node here. I'm going to right click and stop previewing the node. Once again, this has to do with just color labeling, all this stuff, so it's easier to see and move more quickly. So this is basically going to be the output pin on this material function when we add it into the master material. So I'm going to take this, I'm going to rename it to albedo. I'm going to duplicate this, Control D. And I'm actually going to duplicate this a few more times. So this is going to be our ambient occlusion, our roughness, our metallic, and our normal, right? So we have all of those in that order. So since we have normal in the middle, I'm going to bring these 3 down here. I'm going to select all these. I'm going to right click and do line left, so they'll all be in alignment. So I'm going to take the albedo. I'm going to plug it into the RGB value of our albedo texture. I'm going to take this one. This will be our normal. So I'm going to change that name. Sort priority will be 1. Plug that in there. This will be our ambient occlusion. So I'm going to call this one AO. Give it a sort priority of 2. This will be our roughness. Sort priority of 3. And this will be our metallic. Sort priority of 4. Okay. I'm just going to bring these together a little bit more. So I'm going to plug these in. So once again, this is going to be channel packed. So this will be our ambient occlusion, this will be our roughness, and this will be our metallic because it's ORM, right? So now I have all of those. I'm going to select all these, hit C on the keyboard, and type in textures for the name of this comment. Make the font size 12, and I'll just make this color red. Okay. Organize that a little bit. All right, so this is our setup for our textures. Now I'm also going to align and distribute vertically just to make sure all these are spaced evenly. I'm going to save this, find it in the content browser by clicking on this folder with a magnifying glass icon. Click back on our master material. I'm going to grab that function I just created and drag it into our master material. And then I'm going to plug these pins in accordingly, right? So we have our albedo, which is going to go into our base color. We have our metallic, which will go into our metallic value here. We have our normal, which will go into the normal here. We have our AO, which will go into the ambient occlusion here. The ambient occlusion is in the root node. And we have our roughness, which will go in over here, right? So now one thing I do want to do is just reorder these pins because we ordered them in this order, but if you look at this here, they're obviously out of order with the pins they go into, so it doesn't look as clean. It's a little bit less organized and harder to keep track of. And it's a good idea to keep those on track. So if I go in here, I basically want to order this to be albedo, metallic, roughness, normal, ambient occlusion, right? So we'll do that way. So albedo will be 0, metallic will be 1, roughness will be 2, normal will be 3, and AO should be number 4, if I got that correct. Okay, and there we go. Now everything is organized better. Now actually looking at this now, because this pin is up here, AO should probably go on the top, so I'm going to swap that around up here. So I'm actually going to start with AO and go 0. And then we do albedo as 1. Make metallic 2. Roughness will become 3. And normal can become 4, and that should look a little better. Perfect. Okay, so now everything, all the pins and everything are basically in the order of the pins that they're going to be plugged into, and it just makes your graph much cleaner. Right, so now you'll notice this substrate slab that we created gives you some other options. Even though it doesn't have metallic and specular and all that stuff, it does give you some other options, right? So you have F0, which if you hover over these, the tooltip kind of tells you what it does. In this case, it's essentially converting metallic, and if you have specular, into an F0 output. You have an F90. This is essentially the same thing as the F0, but facing 90 degrees away from the view. You have your subsurface values here. You have your secondary roughness and weight for that roughness. You have your fuzz controls, and then your glint intensities. Now, we will go over these in a later video. Those are a little bit more advanced, but for now, we're just going to focus on this. So this is our current setup to get the standard fab assets working using a standard substrate setup, right? So once again, we're utilizing our ambient occlusion, albedo, metallic, roughness, and normal. The albedo and metallic are going into the substrate metalness to diffuse albedo F0 node. The diffuse albedo and F0, as well as our roughness and normal, are going into the substrate slab BSDF simple node. And then our ambient occlusion is going straight into our substrate root node, and then front material is plugging straight into that substrate slab BSDF simple node, right? So I'm going to save all of this. Find this master material in the content browser. I'm going to close this out. From this master material, I'm going to right-click and create a material instance. I'm just going to leave the name as is, and I'm going to drag this into the folder for our fab asset. I'm just going to move that over there. And I'm essentially going to give it the same name as this material instance that already exists. So I'm going to hit F2 on this. I'm going to copy, paste, and then I'm going to do underscore substrate as a suffix to this name, just so we know this is the substrate version of that instance. Double click this, load it up. I'm going to close the preview window here just so this sits on the side. And I'm going to plug in those textures, right? So albedo, normal, ORM, which are all right here. I'm just going to drag those over. Okay. So now all of those exist. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring back that view window here. And I'm going to grab the asset itself. Now keep in mind the aspect ratio of this preview window, it will change the field of view of the camera, so it can become a little bit warped and wide angle if it's not a little bit more normalized. So I'm going to grab the mesh here, and I'm going to click on this little brick icon here. This will utilize whatever mesh you have in the content browser as the preview mesh. I'm also just going to save everything real quick. And I'm going to hit F to focus on the asset. So now you can see that this asset is utilizing the substrate material setup, right? Now if I bring this side by side with the original one, same thing, it's utilizing the sword in the preview window because I already set it in the other one. I'm just going to line these up side by side here and try to get relatively the same view. And actually I'm going to, because of that distortion, I'm going to do it on the top half. There we go, side by side. Okay. All right, so on the left we have the substrate version of the material. On the right we have the standards version of the material. The substrate version looks almost identical. There are some slight differences. One of them is the overall clarity, it looks like, from what I can tell. It might not come through on the screen record, but it is slightly clearer, it seems like. And another thing to note is that I did enable the ambient occlusion for the original instance, just to see what it would, just make sure that it was a 1-1 comparison, because we are using AO in our new version. So if I disable the AO on the old one, you know, it makes a slight difference. But I do recommend using AO whenever you can. Oh, and one more thing that I'm going to do is add in this naming for the channels, because it actually tells you what each channel is rather than just having to guess based on the name. So I'll go back and do that real quick. So I'm going to go back in here, go back into our substrate ORM textures function, and I'm going to go into our ORM here. Now I'm going to disable live preview up here. Just sometimes it does weird stuff when you're trying to add in channel descriptors for some reason. So I'm going to go into parameter customization with our ORM texture sampler selected. And I'm just going to add in the names for our channels, right? So we know that the red channel is our AO, green channel is going to be our roughness, and then the metallic will be our blue channel. Okay, so this will show up in the instance now and just be a little bit more easy to read and decipher what's going on, especially for art direction, working with the team, passing on to the people, all that good stuff. Okay, so this is our Substrate instance. So now you can see that it shows that red, green, and blue are AO, roughness, and metallic, right? Cool. So the last thing I want to do is add in some controls to control the intensity of those values, just to give you a little more control over your asset. So we'll go in and do that and add those in. So I'm going to pull these pins away for a minute. I'm going to expand all of this a little bit to give us some more room in between these nodes. Okay. So first thing I want to do is I'm going to create power nodes. I'm going to create 4 of them. So if you right click and type in power. Okay, so I want 4 of these. So 2, 3, 4. Okay. I'm going to distribute these vertically and align them to the left. Now from here, I want to create 4 constant nodes. Sorry, 5 of these. So I'm going to hold 1 and left click. I'm going to duplicate this 4 times. So 2, 3, 4, 5. I'm going to select all these. I'm going to distribute vertically and align to the left as well. And I'm going to select all these and convert these to parameters. And I'm going to give these a name. So the first one will be our specular. Actually, sorry, we do not need this one. Because we're not using specular, I'm actually going to get rid of that and this power of 2. So the first one will be our AO. The second will be our roughness. This third one will be our metallic. And then the last one will be our normal flatten. This will allow us to adjust the intensity of the normal map. Okay. So the default value for all of these is going to be set to 1. Max slider value will be 1. Normal flatten default value will stay as 0 because we don't want to flatten the normal at all by default, but we're going to give it a slider max of 1 as well. We're also going to select all these and put this into a group. So I'm going to call this group B surface. Okay, so B space pipe surface. B space pipe space surface. So then I'm also going to sort these in the order I want them to show. So I'm going to set AO to 0, roughness will be 1, metallic will be 2, normal flatten will be 3. I'm going to save all those. So now what I want to do is go in and plug these in. So these 3 here are going to sit under the ORM, obviously. And then these powers are going to tie into them. So I'm going to take the AO, the roughness, and the metallic and plug them into those corresponding power nodes. And then the base for each of these are going to go back into our channel. So we have AO, roughness, and metallic. And then the exponent value will go into these constants that we created, which are now constant parameters. Okay? Right? So those are all plugged in. Now what I want to do is take this normal flatten, throw it under this normal texture. Since we're not using specular, I'm going to slide this back up here, get rid of this extra space. So for this one, we don't want to use a multiplier power or anything like that. What we do want to use is something called a normal flatten or flatten normal node. So you start typing in flatten normal, you'll see it pop up. And you want to plug your output normal into this. The normal map will go into normal, and then your flatness will go into this node. Okay, so now you can control the intensity of that normal. It just gives you a lot more control over your surface. It's very rare that you'd want to use that, but it's worth having in your master material or material function. So you can go and utilize it whenever you like. Okay, then again, I'm just going to select all these nodes and align these to the right. And I'll take these and align these to the left. And all these are all aligned to the left. Okay, so everything should look good. So I'm going to save this. Go back into our master. Nothing has changed here because our outputs have not changed. We're still using those same outputs. But then in the instance, you'll see that we now have surface control. So if we go in here, I can control the values for ambient occlusion, for example. Would you pay attention to the bottom of the handle here? You can actually see that coming through, right? So that's 1 AO, that's 0 AO. I can even bump it up to higher values if I want to. I do have the slider set to lock out at 1, which I'm going to change for AO because it is beneficial to go at higher values. So I'm going to set the slider max to like 5. Just give you more control over it. Okay. So now I can scrub that all the way up to 5 if I want to get more of that AO in there. Okay, but default is going to be 1. Your roughness value, you can control that. And then you can also control your metallic value on the surface. And then normal flatten, you can control as well. So right now there is no normal flattening going on. If I set it to 1, it's completely flattening the normal. Now, since this is a nanite asset and fairly smooth surfaced, you're not going to notice it as much on this asset, but you can see it here in like the fine detail. That's with the normal, with the normal and without it. If I bump this way up, you can get a really aggressive normal on the surface, but you don't really want to do that usually. Okay. I'm going to set that normal flatten back to 0 so you get that little detail. Cool. So now what you can do is whenever you import a new asset from Fab, you can change the instance of that Fab asset, so if it's this one, whatever it is, to use the parent of the base that I just created. And they'll still use all the same textures and everything like that. You may have to go in and reassign the textures because the naming convention changed. But because you can see here they're using base color and metallic roughness texture and stuff like that, and then normal is normal texture, right? So the naming of this is, you know, a little bit different, so you might have to just go hot swap those textures real quick, but other than that, you can still use the same assets and all that. All right, hopefully you found this video useful, and if you have any questions, let me know in the comments.